So we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the GOP budget bill. We're going to talk about the continued fight over the New York City mayoral results and the question of who exactly is the Democratic establishment and what do they want. And then we're going to talk about CBS, who waved the white flag, surrendered to the Trump administration, essentially don't want the protections of the First Amendment. So it seems. We're going to talk about those three issues with my friend Max Rose, a former member of Congress from my hometown of Staten Island. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family to join our majority. This is Majority 54. Max, welcome.
Buddy, thanks for having me again. It's great to see you.
Well, we'll get to the New York stuff, which I'm really pumped to talk about, but I would be remiss given this is a national audience. They probably get sick of me talking about New York, which we'll talk about it as a national conversation because it really is, whether it should be or not, we'll talk about. But we've got this GOP budget bill going through Congress, and I think it's very helpful to have you here as somebody who served in Congress and know how things work. Let's start actually with Mike Johnson, who went on Fox News, and he seemed fairly confident that they're going to get this thing passed.
Would you say 85 to 90% it's identical?
Yes, that's great, Sean. Good to be with you. 85 to 90% of this bill is the House-generated product. The Senate made some modifications to it. They made it more conservative in some places and moderated it a little bit in others. But I tell you what, as the president said so well today, this is no longer just a House bill. It's not a Senate bill. It's the bill of the people, of the hardworking American people, and we are going to deliver it, as you said, Sean, by July 4th. It is so critically important. Remember, we got a clear mandate from the people in November to do this. President Trump ran on a clear set of priorities and promises, and we did as well, and this is the vehicle to deliver.
Well, before we get to the Kremlinology here, Max, and whether this thing will pass, do you think he's right that Trump has a mandate for the stuff that's in this bill?
No. Trump, there was no mandate to close down rural hospitals and hospitals in underserved areas. There was no mandate to jack up the deficit even more. There was no mandate for further giveaways to the ultra wealthy. That's why you see Elon Musk, of course, attacking this bill. And the Senate machinations were so fascinating because for a brief moment, we saw some courage from Senate Republicans. So Josh Hawley come out, write a New York Times editorial saying, basically, keep your hands off Medicaid. This is not just a political loser, but it's also immoral. And then he went face to camera after announcing that he will vote for this bill and continued to criticize the bill, obviously trying to have his cake and eat it too. Lisa Murkowski looked like she saw multiple ghosts as she walked to take a yes vote on this. So there's no mandate for this bill. It's going to be a political loser. You can mark my words on that.
Well, one thing that I'm confused about and that worries me a little, I agree generally that the substance of this bill is going to be problematic, but there is some clever timing from the Republicans on some of this stuff. So some of the quote unquote good stuff in the bill takes effect right away, like tax cuts on tips and overtime and all that. And the things like Medicaid cuts don't actually kick in until after the midterm elections. Do you think that timing will matter at all? Or do you think like people staring down potential Medicaid cuts, for example, in their state, even if they don't come into effect before the midterm elections, do you think Democrats will be able to effectively talk about the looming cuts and make those an issue?
I would say, first of all, Democrats need to learn to pass bills that have immediate impact and have universal applications. And so if there's anything in this bill that is politically beneficial, that hits immediately, I hope the Democrats can learn from that when they next have the rungs of power. In the end, though, the Medicaid cuts are a loser. And they're a loser because it scares the hell out of people and it's going to lead to a lot of job loss. And you say, well, Max, fine, that's all theoretical, though. It's because it's not happening before the midterms. Well, what we learned in 2018 was Republicans will lose politically even when they try to pass legislation that ultimately fails, of course, when they attempted to take away or end the ACA. That bill never passed because of McCain's famous thumbs down. but it was still a gigantic loser in the midterm elections, and likely was the number one reason why the Democrats won the House. So I see this being something that in districts throughout the country, Democrats will be able to run on. Again, it is not just about individual people losing their health care. It is a job killer, and it will lead to ERs closing, which entire communities will feel.
Yeah, which is a phenomenon we're already seeing, by the way. Like before this legislation, rural hospitals were closing for some reasons to do with politics and some reasons to do with the state of the industry itself. I would say,
what I would ask you though, do you see this as a change in the politics of Medicaid? For a decade or more, maybe a whole generation, Democrats never ran on Medicaid.
right.
Ever. I mean, we never, ever talked about it. Do you think that this is a change here?
I'm still wrapping my head around it. I'll say, I've long talked about on this podcast and in the Lost Debate that I think Medicaid is probably the most important government program that we have. As somebody who used to serve low-income kids in the South, Mississippi, for example, Tennessee, these are red states. Almost every one of my kids was on Medicaid. And although I lean libertarian for a Democrat, I'm like a Jared Polis Democrat, Medicaid to me should be expanded, not shrunk. It is we're talking about children, right? So if you have the most, Milton Friedman-esque view of government, we're still talking about kids who have no agency. So they deserve healthcare. They deserve robust healthcare. And if anything, we should be making it more generous. So that's where I come from on this. I think it's a moral question, but obviously Medicaid extends beyond, right? And I had, for instance, my grandfather who died at Eggers nursing home was on Medicaid at the end of his life. So people at many stages of life have to go on Medicaid. It's basically a triage in our system for many different types of people. And so I think this is deeply cynical. And I think it's the kind of thing that I want Democrats to be better on. And I actually think this is an invitation to. I think it's easy to beat up on the Democrats that we have now, but now there's an invitation to talk about it. So let's get good about talking about Medicaid. And I think when you see people like Josh Hawley, who knows exactly the problem and still votes for it, all the talking points are there. He knows how bad it's going to be for his state. He needs to pay for it. The only thing I could think is that they think Democrats are going to come in and clean up their mess before these kick in. And they could be right. But we need to, if we're going to step in and fix this for them and save Medicaid before these provisions kick in, then we damn well better make sure the electorate knows about it.
Yeah. Well, look, let's dive into the details though a little bit here. What the Republicans are saying and what they will continue to say is we're not executing major healthcare cuts. What we're doing is we are targeting the 25-year-old single male sitting on his mama's couch who's on Medicaid. Now, that person might exist somewhere, right? Who's living a fraudulent life, ripping off the system. It's certainly not millions, it's not hundreds of thousands, but let's say that person does exist and the Republican Party wants to execute a series of public policy provisions to address that. Well, what you don't do to address that is take a percentage cut to Medicaid block grants to different states. What you do is you pass some type of public policy provision that says we will do X, Y, and Z to make sure that 25-year-old healthy single adult men are not on Medicaid for the long term. That again, and by the way, the effort to execute those controls would probably cost more than the savings, as we found so many times when it came to quote unquote welfare reform bills. But that's not their hope here. Their hope here is to get millions of people off Medicaid and just use the scare tactic of that, modern, now let's call it a Medicaid king rather than a welfare queen. That doesn't exist in the masses.
Yeah, let me say something non-political first, which is I think that person on the couch still should get Medicaid. So I think that person who doesn't work, I just don't think we live in a world where people are like, you know what? I'm getting free Medicaid. Therefore, I'm not going to work because I get Medicaid and therefore I'm sticking it to the man. Whatever. If we're the greatest country on earth, whatever small percentage of people those are, the unemployment rate is so damn low right now, even with all the turbulence we have in the economy. The idea that we have a few percentage of people in the system who are not working and getting Medicaid and not trying to work, which is a very small percentage of the American public, are people who are not trying to work, who are able-bodied, right? Which is what you're saying, essentially. Those people should just get Medicaid. It's more efficient anyway. And I actually think from a moral perspective, and an economic perspective, by the way, we don't want them walking into the emergency rooms and racking up bills once their issues get catastrophic. I think we should give those people Medicaid anyway. But that's not what this is about, right? What we've seen in the states that implement Medicaid work requirements is it's working people. The red tape is so onerous that working people, especially in some of these states, they make you prove it every month. Like, people listening to this, how many things that you have to deal with the government every month do you do perfectly right? Like, where you're like, okay, I'm going to send in the TPS report to the government every month. The reason why the CBO scored it the way that they did is because actual people who are deserving of Medicaid and who are working get kicked off the rolls of Medicaid in a lot of these red states that have already implemented work requirements. That's the only reason why they're able to claim any savings. So they're kicking working people off Medicaid.
Well, what's fascinating here, let's take this conversation beyond Medicaid, because there's actually a deeper divide in the Democratic Party. Because I think the left, the progressives, I prefer you call them progressives rather than socialists, they ardently disagree with what you just said. Because what they are aiming for is universal public goods, where in a world where everybody is provided with a healthcare service of some type. You could call it VA for all, you could call it Medicare for all, you could call it whatever else it might be. These fights over the haves and the have-nots no longer politically apply. And that, for the last 50 years has been actually the most powerful political tool that the Republicans have employed. And they employ it because it works, right? If you're clipping 55K in the Midwest and your partner's flipping 42K, right? The person you hate on a daily basis is not the person making seven figures. They're culturally foreign to you. You can't even imagine that person. The person you hate is the person you perceive beneath you, who you believe is ripping off the system. And we see those politics applied over and over and over again, particularly in the South and the Midwest, to the Republicans' benefit. Now, those arguments never happen about public parks, public law enforcement, fire departments, public education, anything where there's a universal provision of a public good. It becomes much, much more difficult to divide communities and divide body politics. I'll close it up by saying this: you grew up on Staten Island. I represented Staten Island in Congress, a pretty resoundingly MAGA place at this point, right? They disproportionately support Donald Trump. Universal pre-K, which Mayor de Blasio put into effect, is perhaps one of the top three most popular public policies. Because when you're a family making $200,000 to $250,000 a year, which in New York City is middle class, that's a cop married to a teacher, you don't feel like someone's ripping you off and stealing your taxpayer money. So it's also something for Democrats to think, because if you just look at polling, it is a political winner for Republicans to talk about lazy people on some type of welfare. That's why they've been doing it for so long.
Yeah, and it cuts both ways though, because you need it's not very Republican to have all this red tape, right? Like, that's actually more Democratic, right? Like, this idea that you have to submit to the government every month this proof that you're going to get this program, and you have to meet certain requirements, where that's usually our problem, right? Is like, you and I have talked about this a long time, which is that we tend to always want to qualify every kind of program, and it's so hard to explain, right? Whereas, like, even from an efficiency perspective, I think that these programs should be as simple as possible, especially something like Medicaid,
No, look, I grew up in the FQHC movement, the Federally Qualified Health Center movement, which are the leading healthcare institutions throughout the country to provide services to the Medicaid eligible population. And I'll serve on the board of another FQHC called Housing Works. which also runs a whole series of thrift stores and cannabis stores that I know you love to go to.
I'm not a big cannabis guy, although they keep sending us. We have got some good sponsors who keep sending me some good stuff that I've been experimenting with. But I generally, it's not. I'm more of a shrooms guy. But we talk about that another time.
Good for you. I just drink tequila. But what the kind of Medicaid provider community knows is the reason why they're doing this quote unquote red tape is not for any moral imperative to make sure that only the worthy receive these services.
Right.
It is because there will be less people on Medicaid as a result of this. Right. Plain and simple. When you make people reapply for services every 3 to 6 months, every kind of term of reapplication, you will see less people in that world, in that community. And it's not because they suddenly are receiving healthcare from other places, because they're going without services. But let us not forget, this is not a purely ethical, altruistic matter. In so many communities throughout the country, hospitals and hospital systems are the #1 employer, and their survival requires on a Medicaid eligible population seeking services and them getting reimbursements from it. And so when we see ERs start to close, right? I've been to ERs plenty of times. I know you have, from being an idiot like me and falling off fences when you were little.
I just fractured my wrist the other day, actually. So
you never walk into an ER and they say, okay, everyone who's on Medicaid, please go to the Medicaid doctor. That's not the way it works, right? They're all reliant on a whole assortment of reimbursements. So that the healthcare industry itself, a gigantic source of employment and service provision, will take a huge hit.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that we've seen here is, Chip Roy and others within the House are pointing out how funny the deficit math here is. This is a whole other area where the Republicans are full of shit on this. They're basically coming up with procedural moves to pretend that this thing isn't going to explode the deficit, which, by the way, somehow we're cutting all this Medicaid and increasing deficit. This is like the worst piece of legislation you could ever imagine. So we're basically saying, yeah, there's some tax cuts for working people for sure, but most of the work being done in this bill are for people who don't need this money, and we're cutting services for people who absolutely do need them. Now, most of the Republicans know, or at least the swing Republicans know this, Lisa Murkowski being one of them. And what she has done is, to me, both understandable from a political perspective for Alaska, but appalling from the perspective of the fact that she's not just the Alaska senator. She's not in the Alaska state legislature. She was a U.S. senator. And basically what she has done is get a carve out for the Medicaid provisions. It's a little bit more complicated than this, obviously, but basically gets a carve out for the Medicaid provisions for her state and some other pork barrel bullshit. And is voting for this legislation while she acknowledges in her own interview, she was stopped in the hallways of the Capitol, acknowledges that the bill is bad for the rest of the country. This is a U.S. senator.
It's an incredible hustle. But so is the point here that she should have voted no? She would lose her seat, I presume. Is that the world that we're currently living in if you're a Republican? That when you vote no, when you stand up to Trump, you lose your next primary. And so I guess that's what she's operating out of fear of. But I sit in this very weird place. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, because you know just as many, if not more, politicians than I do. There's this really tangible fear that politicians have of losing office, and that I can't really understand why, right? Because more likely than not, you'll make more money when you leave. More likely than not, you'll have more time with your family. More likely than not, you'll be healthier. And psychologically, particularly, I'm healthier psychologically since leaving office, probably more secure in myself. So what is it exactly do you think that they're afraid of here? What is Lisa Murkowski afraid of?
Well, some of these people, like, being half funny, some of these people don't want to spend more time with their family for some various reasons. Like, I'm not sure Ted Cruz is trying to spend more time with his family, right? So there's some of that.
There's I'm not sure Ted Cruz's family wants to spend more time.
Yeah, exactly. It's a win. Everybody else loses when he stays in politics, but he and his family probably win. But so some of these people don't want to spend time with their family. By the side note, there was a very weird Fetterman clip out there of him complaining about how he couldn't go on a beach vacation because of these votes. That guy, I mean, I just have to keep mentioning that this guy should not be in the U.S. Senate. Everything that comes out of his mouth to me is insane.
Well, listen, Connor Lamb for Senate.
Yes.
You heard it. You heard it here.
But yeah, I don't think these people are normal people, Max. You know this. Like, a lot of these people are not normal. And so they don't want normal. They don't want to, hang out with their family. They don't want like a sort of a calm existence. They're afraid of the world outside of politics, especially the people who've been in the Senate for a long, long time. Lindsey, I personally think Lindsey Graham's life would have been a lot better if he went down under a McCain unifying message. He would make a decent amount of money, but he would have at least a soul. He would be able to look back and say, I stood for something in politics. And now it's like, when he's on his deathbed, what is he going to be able to look back and say other than he was sycophantic to whoever was in vogue in Republican politics?
Yeah. Well, I'd say, look, a lot of politicians are actually very bad at making friends and don't have hard skills. So the idea of being on the outside is really, really, really frightening. And I say that with some level of self-awareness because I'm trying to work on making friends, and I'm not sure if I have hard skills either. But we can leave that for another conversation, my friend.
I believe in you.
But so I just think that it gets to this vicious hamster wheel that I sincerely hope for all of them that they can get out of and realize that their allegiance should be to the country, not their own political future. And I was proud personally that I tried to live by that creed. But just a few last points on this bill, and I'm going to tee them up as questions.
And then as you do this, tell us whether you think it'll pass the House. I suspect yes, because Trump is undefeated.
Yeah, no, the House Republican caucus are fully owned subsidiaries of Donald Trump. This thing is going to pass. They'll figure out maybe some way to save face in some type of committee convening, but the ship has sailed. Donald Trump will put his muscle on these folks. But there's just a few kind of tactical questions that I will tee up to you, because this is about as well the future for the Democrats. One is this bill is over 1,000 pages long, thousands of pages long. So should Democrats get behind what used to be a very Republican notion that tax bills in particular should be no more than just a couple of pages? Should the Democrats get behind a tax code that is only 2 to 3 pages long? Plain and simple, right? Should they say something like that? And then number two, the Democrats are at a fork in the road when it comes to no taxes on tips. Yes, no taxes on tips is here, but it's just a wink and a nod to it. I believe the cap is like $25,000 for tips, which in the span of someone's annual income could be not a majority in many cases. Should Democrats say no? Like we're the ones that actually get this done, or do they stand opposed to it?
Yeah, I'm a fairly strong deficit hawk, but from a political perspective, so putting the substance aside of everything, there's a reason why I'm not in elected office. But on a political perspective, Democrats would do well to be like mint the coin, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, simplify the tax code. Like basically what Trump is doing is he's doing every possible irresponsible fiscal move you can make. And he's in a long tradition of Republicans who've done this to Democrats, where then Democrats take office and with varying degrees of motivation have been either significantly more fiscally responsible, which was the case of Bill Clinton, or marginally more fiscally responsible in the case of Barack Obama and a little bit Joe Biden, right? Whereas I think Democrats should flip this dynamic, force the Republicans to actually, for once, be fiscally conservative. Let them be the ones to fix the budget math later on, or we just mint the coin and ignore the deficit cap and all this kind of stuff, but push them to the brink. And I agree with you. Let's simplify. Okay, well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what happened in New York and how the national establishment, shall we say, has been interpreting those results. We also got some new news around the ranked choice results that I think slightly color, how people are talking about this. And then we've got Trump with his ongoing assaults on the media, and Bernie Sanders going on Joe Rogan to talk about that issue and other things when we get back.
Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved superpowered chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Hiya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great and it's perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Hiya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else you can imagine. Hiya is designed for kids of all ages and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. It's also fun to say, Hiya. As you know, I'm a father, and I'm always on the lookout for the best possible vitamins for my child to take. I'm so happy I've come across Hiya Health. The ingredients are amazing, and I don't have to worry about sugar or gummy junk because Hiya Health is made without that stuff, and it's still able to keep that great taste. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/majority. This deal is not available on the regular website, so go to hiyahealth.com/majority and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults.
All right, I want to take this Mamdani situation, Max, in 2 parts. One is the national Republican response to Mamdani, and then the Democratic establishment. I suspect we'll just generally agree with how appalling the Republican response has been. Trump was asked about Mamdani on his visit to Florida with DeSantis, and here's a clip of that.
Thank you.
Mr. President, your beloved New York City. Your beloved New York City may well be led by a communist soon, Zoran Mamdani, who in his nomination speech said he will defy ICE and will not allow ICE to arrest criminal aliens in New York City. Your message to communist Zoran Mamdani.
Well, then we'll have to arrest him. Look, we don't need a communist in this country, but if we have one, I'm going to be watching over him very carefully on behalf of the nation. We send him money. We send him all the things that he needs to run a government. And by the way, they get about 3 times what you get, Ron. If you look at the per capita, Florida gets 1/3 of what New York gets in terms of the numbers. Why don't you give us those numbers?
Yeah, well,
because that's what we should send him.
Yeah, well, like sometimes people say Florida gets more because they count Social Security recipients, but that's not money to the state. Those are seniors that live here. If they moved to North Carolina, you could count it there. So it has no interaction with the state government. They get more in the city and state governments than we get.
Right, substantially. We're going to be watching that very carefully, and a lot of people are saying he's here illegally. He's, we're going to look at everything, and ideally. He's going to turn out to be much less than a communist. But right now, he's a communist. That's not a socialist. I've always said, we will not have socialism in this country. In the speeches, I said, well, what? They skipped socialism. And you got a lot of them like that.
So what say you about this, Max? This Trump,
it
won't be the first time we see these two clash.
It's disgusting and reprehensible and also quite predictable that he would do something like this. He's been doing this for... People say since his first presidential election, but remember, this was the guy who led the birther campaign well before that, challenging Obama on where he was born, which was perhaps the opening salvo of this disgustingly racist effort that he's undertaken. So I think it is incumbent upon Democrats across the spectrum to hit back on this. But on the same hand, let us not forget that Donald Trump undertakes statements like this during moments when he wants to shift away from territory that he's nervous about. The last thing that he actually wants to talk about right now is this disgusting tax bill. And so I do also think it's imperative for leaders of the Democratic Party to make sure that their focus remains on that, because it's a dead loser.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's the New Yorker in me, which we saw this in California, is just really, really anxious about like threatening funding the way that they do. And then also like the prospect that they'll do what they're doing, with troops are still, I think, as of today in LA. It's just ridiculous. Like they shit on blue cities and blue states constantly, yet somehow our politics makes it impossible to do anything but support the most robust series of policies and the most generous language for rural areas, which I gladly do. We were just talking about Medicaid in rural areas. I ran schools in Mississippi. I love red states, right? Like I love the work I've done there. I love the people there, but somehow that generosity of spirit doesn't come back to us. Like they just continuously shit on us.
Well, let's be really craven. Democrats, if they in 2032, if they are going to win the Senate under a new electoral map, where a whole series of votes have shifted away from urban centers, we're fucked if we don't have a rural strategy. So let's just put that out there. But also, I do take great pride in Democrats being the party that isn't just so craven, isn't constantly trying to divide. And look, all credit should be given to Mamdani for running on something, not just against something. He didn't actually mention Donald Trump very much in his ads. I am weary of trying to kind of take big macro lessons from a New York City primary race, because that is not representative of a national electorate or swing congressional or Senate races. But it's really worth talking about the way that this guy ran on, free and fast public transportation, universal child care, freezing the rent, these things that people can remember. But notice, I don't think he won because he calls himself a socialist. I think he probably would have won more votes if he didn't win because he talks about refusing to condemn the term globalize the intifada. So I think it's important that all Democrats, but particularly this emerging, emboldened wing of the Democratic Party, talk about addition rather than subtraction. We're always going to try to learn to read the tea leaves from elections. You and I, as New Yorkers, both also know that this was a consequence of Andrew Cuomo running a horrifically bad campaign and also being not the right politician for the moment. If Tish James had been running instead of Andrew Cuomo, Tish would have beat Mamdani by 20 points.
Right.
And we'd be having a whole different conversation about the left not being ready for the moment or so on and so forth.
Well, and the same day we get Mikey Sherrill winning in New Jersey. Nobody talks about that, beating Ras Baraka. Which one could, if you're talking about on ideological grounds, that tells you plenty. You had also a more moderate candidate winning in swing congressional district. But what I agree with so much of what you said, and I want to come back to the globalized intifada debate because I think that's important. But before we get there, here's a tweet from Dan Pfeiffer, a friend of mine, but like I do want to give him a hard time about this tweet. It says, "What's happening in NYC is a blaringly loud message to those in the Dem establishment who still cling to old politics, recite focus groups' talking points, and are too afraid to say what needs to be said. We have a lot to learn from Zohran Mamdani and his campaign." Now, if you look in the dictionary under Democratic establishment, Dan's picture will be there. Never mind when you start to look into things like focus group politics and all that. And I like Dan. He's been very nice to me over the years. But this is what I saw time and again after the election. And a lot of these people are my friends, stipulated. But I want to give them a hard time about this. because one person from the Democratic establishment after another was like, the Democratic establishment was wrong. Meanwhile, you line up 90-10 in my world, whether it's Pod Save America, Run for Something, Democratic elected officials, media personalities, one after another, they were warm to Mamdani afterwards, and certainly after the election. Almost none of them were explicitly against him. A lot of them were explicitly for him. And I'm getting all these generalities about the Democratic establishment. I'm like, who are you talking about? Bill Clinton? Like, who cares? Like, yeah, the Rebney board, right? Like, who's the establishment that we're talking about? Like, the media was super friendly to this guy for the most part,
Well, he was a successful politician, right? Who figured out what many successful politicians do, which is how to build a new coalition and get 51% of the vote and do it in a non-traditional way, right? So he built this coalition without major union support, without the support of the old school African-American communities that we also often talk about in New York City politics, and certainly without, major real estate support. But that doesn't mean that everyone was against him, right? And
Right.
Dan Pfeiffer, it cracks me up, man. But like, this is something you and I have talked about quite a lot. There is a culture amongst many of these kind of Democratic leaders where, Dan Pfeiffer's a fantastic hustler. Like, he'll move to where the momentum is so as to accomplish two things. I think one is like there's a profit and loss element to this for him. And I respect that. I'm an entrepreneur. I get it. But I think that there's also like a palate cleansing moment for him too here. And so God bless if he's not the establishment anymore. I don't know who is the establishment then. But he does.
What are they going to do when Bill Clinton dies? Like, they're going to have to come up with new fake establishment figures. It's like, nobody gave a shit what Bill Clinton said about this. And Bill Ackman is not even a Democrat. Like, who are they pointing to that was the Democratic establishment here?
Well, think about it this way too. Let's talk about the nation, right? When Bill Clinton won the presidency in 1991, they pretty loudly said that they were not going to hire many Carter staffers. That we're now in a post-Carter day and age after losing so many elections. Carter had lost in 1980, lost his reelection. The space in between those two elections, 1980, 1991, is now greater than the space between when Obama was last in office and when the next Democrat in, I believe, 2030 will be sworn, 2028 will be sworn in. So, we're going to very quickly move to this space where we're talking about a post-Obama administration time, right? How do we move beyond those politics to something different? And I guess people who led that movement are scared of themselves being potentially the establishment. So they're going to try to focus on someone else being the establishment. But Dan is absolutely right that we need new tactics to try to understand what is politically effective. The traditional polling is constantly wrong. And the political class are often inept because they get lazy and they get greedy. And then, you try to move on to new folks who have their finger on the pulse. But what I do find concerning, though, is, after Mamdani won this primary, he had this incredible opportunity to also emerge as a uniting figure. And his refusal to condemn the term global intifada, look, I don't think the guy's an anti-Semite at all. I don't think he hates Jews. I don't think he thinks like Jews are not welcome in my administration. And I think he's a thoughtful guy here. But I think that he has this very keen understanding of and commitment to his political base. That's who he's listening to, that political base. Keep that base mobilized, keep them activated. And all I can think is maybe this term, globalize the intifada, matters to that base, which to me, I guess, is concerning. But also I just want to understand it from an analytical perspective. Like, why, when you have this moment to become something much more than you already are. Why make that decision? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah.
I don't.
Let me try to square the two things you said. Like, on the question of like what, my former colleagues in the Obama administration and their relevance, I think in many cases, a lot of my colleagues made themselves irrelevant by selling out in very major ways in the private sector. Like this idea that we were the ones we were waiting for. Like our movement fizzled the moment people's self-interest got involved. And that makes me really sad. I totally get it, but it makes me sad. The other flip side is the people who did stay in politics stayed in too long. Like and I know these seem like contradictory ideas, but the most important decision I ever made was going down south in the middle, a year into the Obama administration and running schools, because I just felt like I needed real life experience. And too many of the people who are these sort of sages on the stage within the party now have never had real jobs before outside of politics. And I think that is a huge blind spot. And it's why they are constantly chasing fads, right? Zoran Mamdani is not a fad if you live in New York. He is a real person who won a really important election. But the nationalization of him has become a fad. Like the reason, like, why am I listening to somebody in San Francisco, which by the way has some of the most appalling symbolic leftist politics we have ever seen? Why are they lecturing me on what's happening in New York when almost to a person, every single one of these people has had nothing to say when places like San Francisco have backslid, places like Chicago have backslid, right? Like show some courage and unite around those fights, right? And it's why when they see somebody like Mamdani, when he uses language like globalized intifada, or back in 2020 when we have things like defund the police, why they're so susceptible to these things, because they don't have a real grounded perspective on where we should take the party, because they don't have experience. And what you said around globalized intifada is, I think, really important. Do I think Zoran Mamdani is an anti-Semite? I have no reason to think that whatsoever. And I am fairly confident that if and very likely when he gets elected, he's going to bend over backwards to show that he's going to protect the Jewish community in New York. That is every hope and expectation that he's going to do that. But what he and other people on the progressive left have done when they use language like globalized intifada and defund the police is they deliberately use language that it's up to us to interpret. It's like, oh, you don't know what it means to defund the police. We don't mean defund all the police. It just means that we're going to move some money to mental health services. I'm like, how am I supposed to know that based on what you said? Or you don't know what globalized intifada means because yada, yada. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't in that seminar in Columbia. Like, why don't you use plain language so we can all understand what it is you mean? Because if I don't understand what it is you mean, a lot of people don't understand that what you mean. And actually, maybe that's the point of what you're saying. You want different people to interpret different things based on what you're saying. And when you're talking about things as serious as political violence and global violence, maybe you should be more clear, Max.
Well, I love your point about political staffers and political leadership. Because there has been this culture in the Democratic Party of using public service as a palate cleanser to have your progressive moment before you go work for BlackRock, before you go work for Goldman in some type of, whether it's public affairs role or strategic role, of course, before you go work for Google or Meta, or if you're a lawyer for Skadden or whatever else it might be. But irrespective of what you do there in those positions, you have those pictures of you on your wall with Obama. So it all makes sense because what you've remained is an institutional climber. I've basically done three things in my life, right? I served as a combat officer in the United States Army. I served in electoral politics, and now I'm an entrepreneur. I got to tell you, the scariest thing I've ever done, and the thing that I probably have some of the most respect for, is entrepreneurship. Like, I'm a capitalist, and I believe in people who build businesses. What you were talking about, though, is a very different psychological profile, which is someone who spends their entire life climbing institutions and doing things to benefit themselves, and then just wants to feel good about themselves, so they'll go and play in progressive politics for a couple of years. In this instance, we got to talk now about these law firms, right?
Right.
I can't tell you, man, how particularly when I was going through that first impeachment vote, how many calls I got from corporate lawyers who were donors at some of these firms that just bent the knee to Trump, who said, listen, man, you got to have courage, right? What's the point of what you're doing if you're not willing to make the hard decisions and have courage, right? And look, take it. And I'm going to say something here that is controversial. I might not get invited back, but look at Ella Emhoff, right?
She's partying up with Mamdani on election night.
Doug Emhoff and Kamala Harris's daughter partying with Mamdani, right? Go Mamdani, fight for affordability, stand up to Trump. At the same time that her pops just clipped $6 million annual salary from a law firm that made a deal with Donald Trump. Talk about your cake and eat it too, right? No, I'm a socialist. I'm with Mamdani. I'm on the good team. But daddy's paying your rent because of his deal with Donald Trump.
Well, you talk about these luxury beliefs. You and I were talking about this the other day. Here's an assignment for people. And pick Cuomo and Mamdani voters so we don't make it about any one person. Go to all the people in your life who voted in this race, if you know anybody, or who just have an opinion on the race, and ask them one question. What were their positions on education, which is the most important job of the mayor of New York, is educating our city's children. And here's what I will guarantee you. 9 out of 10 of those people don't know the differences between Cuomo and Mamdani on education. And that tells you that this is very symbolic, as a lot of these races tend to be, especially as you go up the grass tops, right? Like a lot of these podcasts we're talking about, a lot of these thinkers who are lecturing the invisible establishment on what the meaning of this race are, couldn't even tell you what the guy's position is on educating the city's children, the most important job he has. They probably couldn't even tell you that Brandon Thompson or Brendan Johnson in, was it Thompson or Johnson in Chicago? The mayor of Chicago has like a approval rating in the teens and has mucked up an already mucked up education system in Chicago, or that the kids of San Francisco were begging to go back to school when the rest of the country, even in blue cities, didn't get there. None of these people had anything to say about any of those things. None of these people could tell you anything about what this guy is going to do on education. And it's because of the phenomenon you're talking about, which is they live very privileged lives. And when you're very privileged and the consequences of who's going to be in office don't really matter to you, then you don't really need to know what their education policy is. You just need to know what they're hashtagging in their tweets.
It's challenging here too, because what's also happening to you and I as we're getting older. Right?
Yeah, these kids these days, Max.
And we're, it's a very weird thing. We're similar age. We've kind of been New Yorkers through and through culturally our whole lives. And certainly for the first time, right, I'm seeing a political movement that I admittedly don't feel this kind of emotional, instinctual understanding of. And so what I do think a point that I would like to make to people as they're constantly looking to tell the story of the divisions in the party. I don't know many Democrats running nationwide, and I know a hell of a lot of them that are not comfortable talking openly about universal childcare, improved public transportation, and ideally, it's not that big of a leap to make it free and fast. That's not that big of a deal. And affordable housing for all in a world where we do not have people living on the street. That is a uniting agenda, right, in the party. Now, the challenge is now, because there's always, if what establishment means is you got power, maybe we're looking at the emergence of a new establishment here that largely made their way over the last 10 years about constantly shifting the Overton window. Once the party got on board something, right, now everyone's talking about universal health care. Some say Medicare for all, some don't. But now, okay, now we got to talk about something else, right? Because everyone's on our side on that. Is this going to stop being the wing of the Democrats that constantly has this addiction to the Overton window and work on how to unite the party around admittedly very bold, universal, and immediate policies? My sincere hope is that it does that.
Well, Max, let's move on to one other issue here, which is CBS agreed to a settlement with the Trump administration over quotes, air quotes, doctored Kamala Harris appearance right before the election. Trump also withdrew the federal case against the Des Moines Register because they didn't like the Ann Seltzer poll, but then they refiled with state court because I guess they think they'll have a better chance there. Last week, Bernie Sanders went on Rogan and was asked about this. Let's go to this clip.
But that's not investigative journalism if you change someone's answers. If you ask her a question and she comes with a rambling answer that doesn't make sense and you edit that out and insert another answer to a different question that seems more cogent.
Joe, then you're walking down, you're walking down a dangerous path. Suing media has the impact of intimidating media. All right, if somebody sues you, all right, let me finish, all right?
Okay.
Somebody sues you, why not you? You could be sued tomorrow, right? Because you are doing this. You're too sympathetic to this.
Right.
And Joe, you did that. And they have a big law firm behind you. You're going to have to spend zillions of dollars defending yourself. You know what? Next time you do an interview, you say, maybe I'm not going to go in that area. Right?
No, but it's not that. It's editing things to make deceptive editing.
Joe,
so in deceptive editing,
I don't
give people a different perception of who this candidate is than reality.
All right, but you got to explain.
But that's not objective journalism.
I know, but
that's campaigning for that person.
Right, but
would you agree with that?
I don't have those details. I don't know that I agree with your analysis of it. I don't know.
So first of all, it's good that Bernie Sanders is on Rogan. I think that we need more of this. It's kind of a frustrating back and forth, and I get it. Whenever you're in a 2-hour or whatever interview, you're just not going to be up on everything. But I looked into this because I was like, is editing an interview like this abnormal? Of course not. And I looked at, even at the period of time that they're talking about, Fox News repeatedly edited Trump in ways to make Trump look great in the lead up to the election. So the last week of October, he went to that barbershop visit in Harlem and said all kinds of crazy shit that they edited out. And they even stitched him out of order for that one. And then the next morning, he went on a Sunday show and they took out all of his crazy things he was saying about the election being stolen and January 6th and all this kind of stuff. Just this week, we had Stephen Miller going on Fox News while the Chiron on the side was literally showing Republican talking points. Okay. So this is a completely made up thing, like completely made up. And it's really distressing to see people like Rogan trafficking in these ideas.
But I mean, first of all, Bernie Sanders is one hell of a character, man. This dude is just so Brooklyn. It's unbelievable. Like we still
never ironed out of him. You know, it reminds me of my mom. My mom's accent is so thick. It doesn't matter where she's gonna go; it'll never leave. For some reason, mine is gone. Mom, man. You know,
it's just Ravi. You know,
be careful, man. She listens. She'll come after you.
You know. This is a leading corporation paying off the president of the United States. A leading corporation that is not viewing this issue in a silo. They're thinking about the matters that they have in front of the FCC. They're thinking about the matters that they have related to potential mergers that they've proposed. That they want fully executed, acquisitions as well that require federal approval. And they see here a golden opportunity to pay off the president of the United States. This is not about an interview. This isn't about the Harris interview. This is about the fact that they are putting millions of dollars in the pocket of the president, who will then do things to benefit their shareholders. That's the America we live in today. And it's sad, and it's extraordinarily frightening as well. And so then, if you're the Democrats, my question to you is kind of, what do you do here, right? Just in terms of the last 48 hours, right? Where we're getting Medicaid cuts, we're getting giveaways to the wealthy, and then we have corruption instances like this. We have Trump talking about wanting to arrest the leading mayoral contender. How do you respond, like tactically speaking, right? What the hell do you do right now? There's been a decade of this stuff getting thrown at us and thrown at us and thrown at us. How do you, in your mind, how do they respond?
Well, I think actually, to give Zoran credit, I think what I was complaining about with the establishment is actually what we need to do. In this case, Except I think there's even more evidence that there is an establishment now. It just happens to be the Republican media establishment, right? They own the tech companies now. The tech companies have bent the knee to them. They have a much more robust and sizable echo chamber in the media than we ever do. They pretend like MSNBC and CNN are the game now, right? Small sliver of the media people get. Most of the media people get is actually dominated by right wing. Go to what the podcast charts are, who's ranking on YouTube, right? Outside of Substack and small corners of establishment news, which actually you can't even take for granted anymore, given what CBS and ABC did, right? Like, I do think that you put those together with the New York Times, had a fairly liberal skew, even with the journalistic standards that they have, which they do have stronger journalistic standards than, say, a Fox News would, or maybe even the New York Post. But they still think like liberals, right? And so if they're going to make mistakes, they're going to make those in the direction of their liberal worldview, right? Stipulated. But there's such small percentages of the media now. So they own the tech companies. They own the media establishment. They own the big corporations. They're giving tax cuts to the wealthy. They're the powerful, right? They're now the deep state, right? So we need to now talk about what the reality really is, which is all the power is them. And that also means it's not my particular cup of tea, but the conspiracy theories now need to land at their doorsteps, right? There are conspiracies happening in plain sight, which are real conspiracy theories. And then if there's the Alex Joneses of the left, go to town. Whatever your conspiracy theories are, don't put anybody in harm's way. We don't need any Pizzagates, but whatever tinfoil safe conspiracies you want to throw out there, go for it. This should be on them now.
That's really, really well said. We don't need more studies on how to appeal to young men, and we don't need necessarily to figure out, who's our Joe Rogan. Is this line of attack, though, against the powerful establishment that doesn't give a shit about you, that I think is not just an absolute winner, but in this instance is undeniably true. Donald Trump has built out over the course of the last 18 months an infrastructure to put money in the hands of himself and his family members, all while under the umbrella of understanding that they cannot be indicted and prosecuted for anything at the federal level. This is the type of corruption that is why the United States rebelled against the notion of having a king in the very first place. Let's just look at, I know we're running up on time, but let's just look at this crypto coin, man. A classic pump and dump that they utilized to accomplish two things, right? They fleeced their own supporters, but popping out this meme coin that they knew their folks would all buy up right away, and then they sold in mass. Trump made nearly $100 million in one day, and also established a vehicle for foreign nations to buy him off on a weekly basis in non-disclosed, anonymous ways. It is corruption incarnate that makes anything Hunter Biden did, and I'm not about to, defend that nut job addict, but it made anything that he ever did seem like pipsqueak material.
I totally agree, and I think we should have you on to talk about that specifically, because I continue to think that is probably of an epic Mount Rushmore of scandals that we have with this Trump administration. I continue to think the crypto the opacity and the brazen nature of that, plus the golf courses in places like Vietnam, just the corruption in plain sight is absolutely nuts. Well, Max,
yeah, and by the way, you know why people open up golf courses, right? I mean, we've never talked about this enough with Donald Trump. Golf courses are the number one way to launder money. Ahead of anything else, you want to launder significant amounts of money, open a golf course. And then you can have 1,000 LLCs that each buy a $500,000 membership that don't exist. You can make up tee times and all the rest. This is what the Trump company and companies are doing right before our eyes.
I feel like that would be a good Ozark-style TV show, laundering money through a golf course. All right, Max, thanks for joining us. Anything you want to plug while we got you here?
Oh, man, I'm just really happy to join. I'm a huge fan. I love the way you and Kander look at the world.
Well,
And,
he's lucky because he doesn't sling the arrows like we did today. So he can luckily say he doesn't own any of what we said today.
No, yeah, my apologies for that. I feel like I might have brought this.
I'm always looking for an excuse to tee off, to use a golf metaphor. But the other thing is, for people out there, I wrote a novel. Max was helpfully helped me launch the book at our book launch event here in New York City, but it's called Garbage Town. We're having a huge surge of interest in the book. You can get it wherever you get your books. And if you've read it already, go leave a 5-star review on Goodreads, Amazon, Storygraph, wherever. And you could buy it at your local bookstore through bookshop.org too, if you want to support local. Bezos has enough of our money. Well, thank you, Max. I really appreciate it, man.
Thanks, bud. It's great to see you. Happy 4th.
All right, later.